Hello, my name is Terry Eman. I'm a social worker with Hope Hospice, and I am sitting here with Mr. Henry Ezen. And we are conducting an interview for the Veterans History Project through the Library of Congress. I am with Hope Hospice, and Henry has been with us for a little while. He was born June 11th, 1920. He served for the U.S. Army during World War II as a technician, 3rd grade. We are at his home right now in North Fort Myers, Florida, and today is July 15th. Henry, I appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you, Mrs. Eman, for this opportunity to present this interview to be inserted in the Library of Congress. To begin with, I was born in Worcester, Massachusetts, and the family that I was born to was an ordinary working type family. There was 3 boys and 5 girls in the family, and there was my mother and father. It was a very happy household, and we discussed all the things that went on in the country, and so that we were very much up to date with all the wars that were going on. I was educated in the public schools in Worcester, Massachusetts, which included the grammar school, junior high school, and high school. And after the service, I took advantage of the GI Bill of Rights and became a graduate of Worcester Polytechnic, getting a degree in mechanical engineering. Further on in life, I went to various night courses in colleges, and I learned computer science, and I studied German. I had one brother older than I who also served in the United States Army. He was serving in France in a railway battalion. I enlisted in the service from Worcester, Massachusetts, and I will read to you some of the things I have written about my experiences. I choose to read them rather than to try to recite them from memory, as I seem to do better at this. Today is 2 days away from my 89th birthday. Sitting on my carport in North Fort Myers, I reminisced about my military life during World War II. I realized that it was unique and an unusual experience and worthy of setting down in print. For the sake of posterity, I shall begin with my volunteering for the military on October 13th, 1942. Now, the reason I enlisted was because I was very shortly to be drafted, and I felt by enlisting I would be able to choose my branch of service. The Great War had been in its 4th year. Hitler had overcome most of the small countries and was fighting France, England, and the United States all at once. In my youthful exuberance, I did not know what was to come. I figured the war would last a few months at best, and I would have all this adventure under my belt. So lightheartedly, I enlisted in the Coast Artillery and assumed I would be safe from overseas assignment and dangerous fighting. How wrong could I have been? After receiving our shots and physical examination, 13 of us, having attained high IQ scores, were sent from Fort Devens to the Coast Artillery Group on Cape Cod Canal in Massachusetts. The unit that I was assigned to was a 241st Coast Artillery Battalion. This group was made up of a few National Guard companies from Boston and New Bedford. This during the winter months of 1942. The barracks where our living quarters were made of wood with only a tar paper covering on the outside. The coal-fired pot-body stove made living there barely comfortable. My life there was made up of learning military life and during our turn on the HECP, which was the Harbor Entrance Command Post that was set up to protect the shoreline of Massachusetts and also to protect all of Cape Cod within the Bay Area. This consisted of a small building on top of the highest hill in the area assigned to the battalion. We had telescopes set up there so that we could examine the Bay Area constantly to be sure there wasn't any enemy activity. We spent numerous hours looking for signs of enemy submarines that may have been planning to set foreign agents on our soil. There were periods set aside to practice loading and firing the 4 155mm cannons that would have been used against enemy ships. Life on the post was quite different than the regular Army post. Whereas we did conform to Army regulations as far as training, our off hours were quite nice. We wore Army regulation clothes, but in a haphazard way. Shirt tails were not tucked into our belts, and mixed items of military nature were worn. We were free to leave the post evenings, but under certain guidelines. For example, a full gun crew must be on ready condition at all times on the post in case an enemy was sighted. Outside the confines of our post, there were a few local pubs and restaurants which served to break up the monotony to our camp life. A few of the soldiers did become frequent visitors to some of these neighbors, and after a few of these liberties, I decided it was more relaxing to stay in camp in my off hours. I did weekend passes to go home, as I was only 80 miles away from my house. A friend of ours who lived near me and joined up with me used our thumbs to get home, but my wonderful brother John usually saved enough gas ration coupons to get us back to camp. We enjoyed this phase of Army life from about mid-February until mid-November. We were sitting one day and my friend remarked that officers' candidate schools were looking for candidates. We filled out the necessary forms for entry to those schools. We were both accepted, but for different schools and different times. He went to anti-aircraft school in North Carolina. He passed and became a second lieutenant. He was sent to the South Pacific, where he remained until his rotation and discharge from the service. I was sent to the Army Ordnance School in Aberdeen, Maryland, where I did very well in my studies and in my close-order drills. I was disqualified from the school because of my striking a fellow student who had been harassing me from day one. I was asked to reapply to the schools in 3 months, but I never followed through with this, as I had come to the conclusion that being an officer was not where I wanted to be. I was sent to an infantry division, the 78th Lightning Division, that was stationed in Camp Butler, North Carolina. It was probably the worst time of my military life, outside of combat. The division was made up of replacements from units that used this as a chance to remove questionable soldiers from their ranks. It was a full field packs weighing 35 pounds and making 4 stacks every day over hills and valleys in western North Carolina. The food was very limited and not very well prepared. Many men deserted rather than suffer the rigid training. One soldier in my barracks committed suicide. I had made up my mind that I would apply for a transfer if an opportunity presented itself. The only good thing that came out of this period in my life was meeting a fellow soldier named Mitchell Ferris. We shared the same Lebanese background. We went on pass together many times together to his home a short distance away, which was Raleigh, North Carolina. I became a good friend of his wife and family, It was the only bright star during my stay at this camp. But our friendship was soon short-lived. My stay at the camp was about 3 months, and this ended our relationship in the military. Many years later, after the war was ended, I visited Mitch and his family in North Carolina. He had been discharged from the military with an eye disease he had contracted in the South Pacific. He died of a heart attack in Washington, D.C. while running to catch a plane back to his home for a business trip. Coming back to my military life, returning to the chain of events at this camp, the powers were with me and answered my prayers. I saw a notice on a bulletin board asking for men with mechanical backgrounds to apply for to join an anti-aircraft equipment repair battalion. I immediately made out the necessary forms. I was notified that I had been accepted for the transfer. I was ecstatic. About being transferred to the 272nd Anti-Aircraft Repair Company in Camp Stewart in Hinesville, Georgia, was like going from hell to heaven. I received a delay en route, and I took advantage of this delay to visit my family again before I traveled to my new assignment. What a joy it was to arrive in Georgia during the spring month. Beautiful flowers were in bloom. The weather was spring-like, and the routine there was sublime as compared to the infantry. I was assigned to the instrument repair group because of my experience as a machine designer in my civilian days. Routine here was much different than the infantry. After breakfast each morning, we had a close order drill that lasted about a half hour. Then we would all load up with trucks and go to the workshops. Here we repaired all types of Army equipment. These ranged from huge tanks to small arms repair. Sometimes we would have a school on certain types of ordnances. In my case, I was given lessons in time to read repaired types of instruments. In my case, I was given lessons. Because of my machine design experience, I was quick to learn how to repair the fire control equipment that was used in anti-aircraft defense. My specialty was a very much used 40 millimeter mounted on a mobile gun. This system was also used to support 4 caliber machine guns. This arrangement of guns and mobile carriage was used with very good effect when preparing for a forward assault of the infantry units. If incendiary bullets were used, they would oftentimes set forests on fire because of its multiple use. The anti-aircraft ordnance units were much used and required constant repairs. Therefore, this was the area in which I spent much of my times in the shops. I was sent to a school in Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland because of my knowledge and experience in this type of equipment. When the school was completed, I was allowed a week's time off, which I used to revisit in Worcester, Massachusetts. When I returned to camp, I found that I had been given a promotion to staff sergeant. This made me quite happy and proud. While stationed at the 272nd Ordnance Repair Battalion, we were sent to Louisiana War Games. This lasted for about 4 weeks. It was preparation for our next assignment, which was overseas and combat. But my stars were not properly oriented. During the trip back from maneuvers, I experienced my first attack of hay fever. As a result of my continued sneezing, I was diagnosed with pneumonia and hospitalized when we reached Camp Stewart. The remainder of the company was told to prepare for shipment overseas. I could not be discharged from the hospital because a patient in our ward had contacted yellow jaundice and we were quarantined. After several failed attempts on my part to rejoin my company, I was transferred to another similar company at the same camp. It was called the 305th Anti-Aircraft Ordnance Repair Company. This started an entirely new experience. I was to teach the new replacements in the use and repair of the fire control equipment. We were assigned to repair the that we were assigned to repair. The transfer proved to be beneficial to me. The personnel in this new unit were much friendlier. The company was made up of people who were working in the automotive industry in South Carolina and Montana. They had started state and National Guard units in their hometowns and had been federalized to make up the cadre of the 305th. The captain, Captain James Leash, was a graduate of an Army Reserve unit. He was a no-nonsense type of person, so the company was run on strict military rules. But the routine was the same as my former assignment: military training and shop work. The officer in charge of our group was a second lieutenant. For some reason took a dislike to me, and showed the dislike in all and any occasions. But fortunately for me, there were several non-commissioned officers between he and I which blunted his exposure to me. One of these non-comps was a man from Oklahoma. He and I became good friends, which pleased me quite a bit. His name was Robert Bussey. He was part Indian and part white. One would have to go quite far to find a nicer and truer friend. We never went on pass together because his wife lived on the post. We never went on pass together, but while on duty and in the evening hours, we were inseparable. Later in life, I called to him on the telephone. I was lucky to make contact with him, as he and I shared a very nice union. He was unaware of what had happened to me later during my military life. A few years later, I found him again, but found he had passed on. His wife filled me in on other details of his death. This left me with very sad feelings, taking many months to endure my depression. Getting back to my life with the 305th Infantry Ordnance Company, after considerable training, we were chosen to join an ordnance battalion that was scheduled to go overseas. When we were loading, I had my first encounter with German soldiers. The German soldiers were used to help with the loading of our equipment on flat trains. Even as POWs, they exhibited rigid discipline. Our group was boarded on a Liberty ship called the Louis Pasteur. The trip across the Atlantic was without incident, but accommodations were frightful. Rather than calling the ship a troop transport, it should have been called a cattle car. The food was terrible, fresh water was scarce, and the ocean was turbulent, which resulted in many soldiers suffering with seasickness. The entire battalion was very happy when we reached Liverpool, England. After assembling the entire group with a truck, we drove to a location that we called the Midlands. You can surmise that we were centrally located in the center of the English Isles because of its name. Our location was a historical. It is called Stonehenge. This area consisted of many large stone pillars placed in a circular pattern. It is thought that the orientation of these stones, each weighing hundreds of tons, were positioned in a very precise manner according to the belief of the populace at that time. There are several books on this that discuss these theories in detail. It was an unusual experience living among these historical stones. Where these stones came from and the meaning of them remains a mystery to me today. We were stationed there for about a month. In this time, many of the men became a part of the locality, meeting pretty girls or becoming a part of the English families. Of course, the food and sweets that Americans provided were an encouragement for the socialization with the local people. But alas, this was not to last long. We were notified that the ship that was to transport us to France was waiting for us. The trip from Stonehenge to the docks at Portsmouth were uneventful. But once we were on the loading docks, excitement ran wild. We were involved in one of the greatest military maneuvers ever attempted. There were units representing a large cross-section of the invading army, and we were chosen to be part of the group was very uplifting. The large trucks and equipment making up our companies were lifted and placed in the cargo bays of the ship without any problem. The trip was in convoy style to safeguard all of the invading forces from any enemy action. When we arrived at Omaha Beach, the area chosen was one of the assault locations. Our equipment and men were unloaded to a platform called a rhino barge. A description of this unit is made from my memory. First, picture a large, rectangular, airtight steel box whose dimensions were 75 feet wide and 300 feet long. Its depth I haven't any way of knowing. It was driven forward by two Cadillac oversized engines. The navigating of these barges was the responsibility of the U.S. Navy personnel. Each of these barges was capable of carrying 500 tons of equipment. Their use was invaluable and deserved a place in the annals of history. We were on French soil. Driving through the roads that the American forces fought so hard to take was quite dramatic. Anyone knew a little French started to put their linguistics to use. I, for one, was limited to bonjour. As we drove further inland, we found the sides of the road were littered with enemy war machines that had been knocked out by Patton's tanks. The Allied forces were moving ahead with great speed, causing havoc with the enemy. There wasn't any doubt but what our tank divisions under General George Patton were successful beyond any previous plans. Because of these successes, we were told we had to work hard to keep the Allied invading forces' equipment in good condition. It wasn't easy to find the groups we were to service, so that it was difficult to service their equipment until they stopped for rest or to be resupplied with ammunition and gasoline. Only then could we examine their trucks and guns and keep these items in good repair. This went on until early autumn, late August. Our group was sleeping in small portable tents, and each night and eating whatever and wherever we could, able to find time. We saw very little of the members of the 305th Ordnance Company. We drew rations and supplies from our company units whenever we were in the same areas. Then in early autumn, we were able to make an old factory our base of operations. We located in the French town of Nancy. This town was located in a very busy area. The factory was heated, thank goodness, and gave us a chance to shower, wash our clothes, and catch up with our mail. Also, we were reunited with all of the other men in our company. The automotive group was the busiest of all of the company, so all the other technical people took turns assisting them. The Red Ball Express, our largest clientele, was made up of many trucks whose sole purpose was to keep the fighting units well supplied. The men from these units would come to us late at night for repairs and expected to have all repairs completed by morning. In exchange for this unusual service, they would drop off a box of meat or whatever we needed and could not receive from regular channels. As a result, we were probably the best fed and supplied companies. These truck drivers, in most cases, were men of color. Their contributions to Allied victory cannot be overstated. Coming back to my work as a repairer of anti-aircraft equipment, I was spending more and more of my time in the field performing maintenance and repair on these armaments. One day a call went out from the captain for volunteers to join up a group of ammunition transportation soldiers. The group would consist of trucks, truck drivers, and non-commissioned officers to manage this group. I thought this would be a great opportunity to see fighting units in action and to get a greater look at the French. I was correct in all accounts, but I hadn't any idea of the many hours and nights the assignment would entail. I was placed in command of about 12 trucks and drivers. We would We would get our daily assignments from division headquarters. The plans were for us to go to prescribed ammo dump to load up our trucks with any and all types of front lines needs. Then we were to find these units, which in many cases were in secluded areas. When these units were located, the ammo would be dumped, in some cases directly to the guns requiring this ammunition. As soon as a truck was emptied, it would be free to find its way back to the area the trucks were assigned. This did not work out well, as many of the drivers drove their vehicles to someplace different than their home places. I was invited when I was doing the trucking of the ammunition, most of the men were invited to stay at private homes. I was invited by a very young boy to stay at his home. I didn't know that he hadn't discussed this with his family, and I drove to his home. The young boy and I knocked on the door to the front entrance. The door swung open. The greeter was a strawberry blonde woman, Suzanne, of about 19 years of age. I stayed with this family for the duration of my ammunition assignment. One day I came home and I found that when I returned home one day from an ammunition run, I found a Jeep from my company, the 305th Ordnance Company, in front of the house. It was a member of my company that had been sent to escort me back to my company commander. After questioning the driver, I learned I was to be sent into the infantry as a replacement due to my having had previous infantry training. General Patton was running very low on infantry replacements and needed to replace the killed and wounded American soldiers resulting from the intensified German resistance. It was a very difficult time for me to leave the Kaufman family after becoming so close to them. I told them I would keep in touch with them as soon as I could. Little did I know what lay before me. The return to my company commander was immediate. Without taking any account of the chance of being killed or wounded, I looked forward to this as another of life's experiences. I never once exhibited any fear or displayed any antagonism toward the officers who selected me to go to the front lines. They gave me my choice of guns or equipment which would give me advantage in the infantry. I chose a Thompson submachine gun with the necessary gun clips, some new overshoes, stockings, and any warm articles needed to ward off the cold December weather. The next morning, after saying the many goodbyes to my friends in the 305th, I along with 12 others from the 305th were chosen to be infantry replacements. We were driven to a replacement depot. There we were assigned and officers from the groups that needed replacements chose the replacements to suit their needs. I was chosen to go to the 26th Yankee Division, a New England group. Again, I was driven to their command post to be assigned to a company. The first thing that happened to me was the loss of my Thompson submachine gun. An officer of the company I was chosen for said, "You are not allowed this because an M16 rifle is the correct issue for you." There we were taken to our respective company commanders to be further assigned. I was placed in Company B of the 101st Infantry Regiment of the 26th Yankee Division. Captain Angelo Menaduto assigned me to his squad as a squad leader. I explained to him that I'd rather not be a squad leader until I had more experience. He agreed, and I became the first scout, a more precarious position than squad leader. I was given 2 rifle grenades as additional armament. The next days were spent firing on new rifles and learning infantry tactics. My platoon leader was Tech Sergeant Thomas Carroll, a veteran of the Alaskan campaign. We were temporarily housed in an old city office building in Metz, a new liberated French town. On the third day, we were driven to our companies that was on rest and recuperation until they were placed in the firing line, which was the next day. The system being used during combat was to place 2 companies on the firing line and 1 in reserve. The 101st Company, my company, was in reserve, but that changed. We were positioned in an area where there was not any real action for 1 day. We occupied a small abandoned farmhouse where we had beds to sleep in and a roof over our heads. The following day we exchanged places with the 329th Infantry Regiment. What a sorry-looking bunch of soldiers they were. Many comments were passed between the 2 companies in good humor. They were dirty, hungry, and in need of ammunition. They had been assigned on the line for weeks. They also gave some good advice to what to expect from the enemy. Mostly about digging foxholes because of the heavy artillery bombardment from the enemy. As soon as we occupied the front lines, the artillery shells started falling. This being the first day on the lines for most of us places, we were much impressed with the accuracy and endlessness of these barrages. None of the people were injured during the search breaks. Our meals were whenever we could, and the sea rations were our main courses. But eating was not on our high priority. Staying low in the foxholes was our main concern. In a short time we became depressed and wondered how we could tolerate this for an extended period of time. And I noticed some of the men were becoming less able to tolerate the shelling and the foxhole living. Then we had emotional breakdowns. One of the men I considered one of the most courageous of the company decided to shoot his large toe. His plan was to blame a shell fragment for the wound and get taken off the line and go to a hospital. But later on in life I read where he was given a dishonorable discharge for the self-inflicted wound. He was taken off of the line and it did save his life. This started many others to consider this, but when I realized the penalty, we all reconsidered. Never did I entertain this way of escaping the chance of being killed. The reason why people will do these things during these emotional times, I will leave the analysis to more capable people than I, who will give you an opinion on the subject. Others were wounded as the days and weeks went on, but on our average, our company did very well. But we must remember this was in a defensive combat, and we did very well. The picture changes completely when the roles change from defensive to offensive. In offensive combat, you must lead the protection of your foxhole and help expose yourself to enemy fire. Having said this, I relate to each evening it was my duty to scout ahead of our company, to keep updated on actions that the enemy were considering. In this way we could be prepared and not be surprised. These scouting missions were taken alone, as I found out that others taking with me increased my chances of being detected by the enemy. This worked out very well for me. Most of these scouting trips were made without danger. I must relate one of my experiences. I decided to enter into a tavern one evening when I noticed all of the bottles of liquor that were on the shelves. I went inside the building and I could see pretty well from the fires of the buildings surrounding this building. I put my rifle over my sling position and I filled my arms up full of bottles of liquor. As I was leaving the building, I passed a German soldier who was doing exactly the same thing, and he also had put his gun on a sling position, which made it both of us were unable to reach our guns and fire at one another. He passed me and I passed him, and we both went our separate ways. And I wonder to this day what stories he told others. I came back, and the people who were drinkers in my company were very happy, and we all had a great kick and when I told them about how it all happened. When I returned back to the company, I found out that we were going into an attack, which is something I dreaded quite a bit. The whole squad of 12 men were taken back off of the line, and we were given extra ammunition and extra sea rations and water. All of our personal equipment was taken away from us to avoid the enemy knowing, in case we were captured, to avoid being informed as to where we came from and what we did. As all the preparations were being made for the attack, we started walking single file toward the enemy lines. It was still quite dark as the time of day was early morning. As we started forward, a second lieutenant approached the patrol leader and asked Sergeant Carroll if he could come along because he was just joined the infantry and he said he needed combat experience. Sergeant Carroll said he couldn't stop him but recommended he did not come along. But the officer insisted in coming, and so this meant 12 men, including myself. We started forward in single line and hadn't gone forward about 50 feet when all hell broke loose. Machine guns, rifles, and hand grenades were all firing at us. I immediately fell flat on my face in the deep snow. The firing continued for about 3 or 4 minutes. As I recalled, there wasn't any screams or yelling or commands being given all of this time. I made sure I had stayed down and didn't make any sound which would give away my position. With the interlude in the firing, I asked the soldier next to me to fire his rifle and that I was planning to throw a hand grenade at the enemy. The hand grenade had the pin. I had removed the pin from the hand grenade. Instead, he rose up and tried to run back to our lines. He was shot down at once. I remained in a prone position for about 5 hours. I hadn't any way to tell the time as I dared not be moved. During this time, the enemy soldiers came over our area and made certain that we were all dead. I didn't look up to see what was going on as I played dead. They pushed my body from side to side. When I didn't respond, they continued on. I could hear them talking to each other, but I couldn't understand German. Therefore, I didn't know what was happening. After about 5 hours, I rose up and slowly said, "Comrade, come here, I am wounded." A few German soldiers came and they talked to me in English. They told me an SS officer would come soon and ask me questions and he would search me. They said if I wanted to be sure to keep what I had, to give it to them, and they would return it back to me. We hadn't gone a few... I agreed to this. The SS officer did come by. He did take the things that I had on him that he wanted, but he didn't take the things the other soldiers had kept. And so I kept the D-ration bars, chocolate bars, dry socks, and a few other items. After he left, two of the German soldiers placed their arms underneath my arms and decided to take me to their command post. We hadn't gone a few steps when a mortar shell burst in front of us. The two enemy soldiers who were supporting me dropped and ran. They stopped a few feet away and examined themselves to see if they had been wounded. I did the same thing. To our surprise, we found that we had many holes in our clothes, but no one was wounded. We all giggled like children and continued our walk to the command post. When we reached the command post, there was an officer and several German wounded at the command post. The command post was a cellar of a home that had been damaged from the shelling. So we were in a cellar of this place. And the man that was in charge was an officer who spoke English.
Now, Henry, weren't you shot at that time?
I was shot, yes. Yes, I had been shot previously before the German soldiers supported me. I admitted that, but I was shot in the leg, and I was also hit on the hip with a hand grenade.
Do you want to tell that story where, if you hadn't changed positions, what would have happened?
When I was laying in the snow, waiting for the firing to stop, I thought to myself that I am facing the enemy, that if I got shot, I would be shot in the head. So slowly and in the snow, I turned 180 degrees so that my feet were where my head was. And that, when I did get hit in the leg, I was thankful that I had changed positions.
Otherwise, you would have been not here today.
Otherwise, I would have probably been hit in the head or the chest or something, and I would have probably been dead. When I arrived at the command post, the officer said to me, "You are a very lucky man. Everybody else in your group was killed," and he showed me all of their dog tags. I looked at the dog tags, and I recognized the names and knew that he was not fooling with me, that I was the only survivor of that group. I was placed there in that group, and he told me I would have to wait until the evening time, and a truck would take us to a more equipped aid station. In the evening, there were several other German soldiers there, and during the night, one of the soldiers took a bayonet and was approaching to stab me with the bayonet. But the officer stopped him, took the bayonet away from him, and told me that it wouldn't happen again.
Now, how was your leg at this time?
My leg had been bandaged by the first aid station that I had gone to, and it was not bleeding because of the cold weather. I didn't have any loss of blood. The cold weather actually was a big help. When I got to the second aid station that had been placed there by the truck, the doctors, there were some real doctors there who examined my wounds after they had worked on their own wounded. In other words, their own wounded took first priority on what was to be done with me. I was taken to this aid station that was in Bonn, Germany, Bonn, which is a very large city in Germany. And they told me that I would be placed in a church enemy prisoner of war place. When I left the aid station in Bonn, I was taken by truck to a church that was taking care of some of the Allied troops. When I arrived there, the chief woman custodian of the place asked me if I was a Flieger or infantry. I told her I was infantry. She said, "Good boy." This showed that the people really resented the flyers for what they were. So this was my place of internment. It was a church where they used part of the facilities to house Allied wounded. I remained there for approximately 3 months. They treated me very well, and they fed us as good as they could. Our rations consisted of what we called grass soup, which was cabbage and greens that were boiled to give us some substance. While I was there, my weight went from 160 to 85 pounds. So you can see the diet didn't agree with me too well. Most all of the men were on the same diet, and we all received the same treatment. While I was there, I was assigned to the doctors, and I helped the doctors to change the dressings on most of the men, and also on a few occasions I was to assist them in operations such as removing somebody's leg. This was not to my liking, and I only had to do it once or twice. But I stayed there for 3 or 4 months, and one day I noticed some American soldiers outside the window of the building I was in, and they were armed with rifles and radios, so I knew that they were soldiers that were coming to rescue us. And I signaled for them to come in, that the German soldiers had left us and we were alone. They came in through the windows and were immediately took over all of the care of the wounded. I took the radio man and went to the 3rd floor of the building, and I showed him the building where the German soldiers in tanks were situated. So he immediately called the artillery to shoot at that building. When he started firing at that building, the German soldiers and tanks and everybody came out of the buildings and started running away. I was very glad to see this, because if they had remained in those buildings and they had fired at the American soldiers that were crossing the railroad tracks, they would have killed many, many of our troops. So I believe in my own mind that I did save a lot of American lives by having the artillery firing at the German buildings.
And Henry, I noticed that you have a lot of medals on your shirt. Can you tell me what those are for?
The medals I received after I was liberated was the Purple Heart for wounds that I received, the Combat Infantryman's Badge, which is this one right here. This indicates that I was in combat in the infantry during World War. Then I have a POW medal, a Bronze Star for being a prisoner the length of time, the American Defense Medal, the Victory Medal, the European Middle Eastern Medal for taking part in the campaign in Europe. I received also the WWII medal, which indicated that I was taking place in Europe.
You got one for the battle.
The Battle of the Bulge medal was given to me because of my 3 weeks in the 26th Infantry Division. The Battle of the Bulge was considered one of the largest and most terrible engagements with the enemy because of the number one, the cold weather and the snow. 2, Germany had considered this to be their last-ditch effect on American troops, and they were going to try to push them back to Paris. And 3, we were mostly all new replacements, so this was a very tough battle for most of the men in the Battle of the Bulge. Thousands upon thousands of men were either killed or wounded or had their legs and hands frozen, which meant that they had to be amputated.
That must have been a very scary time.
The time at the Battle of the Bulge was the worst time that I experienced in the service, and the worst time any of the men with me had experienced. The 11 people that were with me that were killed, I have their names, and in one of the recent memorial services here, I repeated their names so that they would be placed in everybody's memory as men that had died during the Battle of the Bulge.
Did you want to name them?
I will repeat them now. It was Alberto Gomez, a private; John Yankulis, a private; Charles W. Kane, a PFC; Joseph Haney, a PFC who was very close to me; John Shupp was a PFC; Alma Berry, a sergeant; William Reedy, a Tech 4; Thomas J. Carroll, the tech sergeant, and Stephen Wolf, the second lieutenant, who insisted on coming into the attack with us.
Well, Henry, I'd like to thank you so much for serving our country. And we would not be free today without you, I know that. And Hope Hospice thanks you. And everyone thanks you.
I thank you too for giving me this opportunity to relate these experiences so that in the future, people who are considering wars or fighting in wars could go to the Library of Congress and find out what it would be like to be in combat. Thank you very much.